getting out of here.
So retropulsion is basically a fancy word for how the stomach mixes the food around. Retro meaning like opposite direction. So the food doesn't just go directly through stomach to the intestine. It's circulated around, pushed around, and back the other direction. Not removes water, but what does it do? Absorbs water. You might mention something about all the microbes that live in the large intestine and digest things. Not the solutes so much. Okay, well, water and what else? You have any enzymes?
Yeah, you want the specific area?
Yeah, which one? Thanks, you don't have to memorize those. But you want to know the enzymes that are in there too.
Uric acid.
So amylase, probably number one. What's in saliva?
Oh my God.
Do what?
Lysosome?
Yeah, so lysosome.
Oh my God, I didn't know if I'm saying that right. And digestive enzymes that act on starch, specifically?
So for saliva, you know, there's water, solutes, amylase, and lysosome. Or sorry, not lysosome, lysozyme. Lysosomes with organ health. Lysozyme is the antibacterial enzyme. Lysozyme. And amylase and solutes.
KRLO is in the book, it's actually, if you will, it's actually. Okay, because like the way I read it, it's actually in my answer, but it's like further down. Amylase is spelling down.
It's okay, I have like this.
And then he said, what is it? And water.
I really like them because they know.
I was down on it.
They're going to erase it though, because I think they might be on the desk.
I never erased it, I write extra. I did that.
Lots to know about saliva. All right, anything else? All right. May I take that? I thought you'd be going to visit your herd. I know. It's your birthday.
Yeah, I usually do that, but I'm not used to writing them, but I had to do it finalize. That's why I got them every time out. Okay, so it comes in final.
word for how the stomach mixes the food around.
All right, just go ahead and pass that on up. All right, just go ahead and pass that on up. All right, just go ahead and pass that on up. Just go ahead and pass that on up. Everybody looks so happy when they're turning in their quizzes. Like, oh. You're probably right. Usually the first thing you think of is when they're turning in their quizzes. You're probably right. Usually the first thing you think of is when they're turning in their quizzes. All right, so which layer of your GI tract is in direct contact with digesting food? Mucosa, serosa, submucosa. There's A in mucosa. It's innermost layer, touches the food. What's the serous membrane called? It's the peritoneum. Not an organ of the GI tract. It is pancreas. It's not. It's an accessory organ. So if you're trying to tell someone what the difference is, what's the difference between an organ of the GI tract and an accessory organ? Yeah, so yeah, exactly. The parts of the organs of the GI tract touch the food directly, like stomach, intestines. The other things like make enzymes or whatnot. Let's see, which function is described as alternating contractions of smooth muscle? Ingestion, secretion, mixing and propulsion, or defecation? It's mixing and propulsion. A lot of people put A there. So maybe I should talk about those four real fast. So ingestion, that's just putting food in your mouth. The secretion, what's that? Well, kind of. What does secretion mean? Mucus would be one thing you secrete. What else? Another important thing would be enzymes. So secreting mucus and enzymes is what they're talking about. And then defecation, I bet you know what that is. Oh, that's so mean, calling people out like that. Well, for Marty, we do have an animation later about defecation, so hopefully that'll clear things up. So mean. Yeah, so the animation is actually really funny. It's not, I'm like watching the book materials, I'm like, oh, interesting, anyways. Not a function of the small intestine. Does it absorb water, digest carbohydrates, absorb 90% of the nutrients, or digest proteins? It does not absorb water. That's the large intestine. Right. All right, so,
I have a question.
yes.
In our book,
Uh-oh.
for the small intestine, it says absorbs about 90% of nutrients and water that passes through.
Okay, well, fine. I mean, if it says it in there, then I can't.
But what you're looking for was that answer to be wrong, right?
Yeah, I mean, most of the water
Is in-
is in the large intestine.
Okay.
But I certainly won't mark that wrong because it does say that. So,
Okay.
yeah, so you'll get it right, whatever you put then.
Good for you.
I still got it. Because it says, in the book, it says on the large intestine, absorbing some water. So it's opposite, you absorb more water in your large intestine?
You do.
Okay.
It's funny because Google had it the way you were looking for it.
Yeah. Because if you look in the intestines, it's still like really watery when it's getting to the large intestine.
Like the difference between an ileostomy, what comes out, colostomy.
That's disgusting. An ileostomy. Of course, that would be in the ileum. So just a quick overview. There's the digestive system all on one diagram. And one thing to note, obviously the food comes down the esophagus, in here to the stomach, and then it drops it into the small intestine, which goes all around and around. We'll talk more about the different parts of it when we do lab. One interesting thing I think people don't always realize is it comes here at the end, the small intestine, and it gets put into the large intestine, sort of at the bottom. And then the large intestine takes food and it goes up and around, just one loop, down to the rectum there at the end. Yeah, pretty much. And I think a lot of people instead would have some image of like small intestine on top and large intestine on bottom, because that's the way the food goes through. But when you actually look at it, the small intestine takes up this whole middle part, and then it drops it into the large intestine at the bottom, and the food goes back up and around and down. So, which one's longer if you measured it, right? The small intestine's way longer. I think that's the grossest part of dissecting something, is looking at the small intestine, because you can like pull it out. Like, it's really kind of gross. All right, so everything in the GI tract has these same layers, all the way from the stomach down to the large intestine. And I guess it's shade the esophagus too has this as well. So you've got the lumen, which that's the biology word for like an open interior area. You always use that. The mucosa. So that's where the epithelial cells are of different types. Does anybody know what kind of tissue lamina propria is? Yeah, so that's the connective tissue. Because epithelial cells don't have a lot of strength themselves. So you need some collagen and something strong to hold it all together. And then outside of that, you've got a muscle layer to help, right, contract, push the food down. Which is right there. Any ideas why you have a circular muscle layer and a longitudinal muscle layer?
Breaking it down and moving it along.
Yeah, so one just squeezes this way, and then one can kind of squeeze down. So you'll see, I think we have a video of that for the esophagus. What's next? And then way out here, you've got your serosa, which you remember that's a membrane, which means it's got epithelial layer and a connective layer. So it's quite the number of layers there to get through. So yeah, you want to think of it as like this whole thing just coming all the way through all those organs. right. If you need extra review, you can click on that. It'll go through all the different organs and tell you more about them. All right, and as some of you got to see yesterday, the esophagus is collapsible. So how many people had the esophagus and trachea slide? Okay, so half of them did, half of them didn't. So if you looked at it, the trachea, what did the trachea look like in terms of shape? Right, it was a nice, perfect circle. Whereas if you saw the esophagus, what did it look like? Yeah, hard, maybe it looked something like this. So it kind of collapses, and then when you're eating, it expands into its full shape. And it does have stratified squamous epithelium in it, in that mucosa layer. What does stratified squamous mean? What kind of? Well, first, what does the word squamous mean? What kind of shape? What? It's kind of annoying because it probably looks like a square in your book, but that's not really an accurate description, fortunately. So squamous means like a flat little pancake, very thin, right? I guess if you looked at it from above, maybe it would look like a square. So if this is if that's your esophagus, you've got these little narrow, long, narrow pancakes. And what does stratified mean? Layers. So you don't just have one layer of little squamous cells. You've got 20 layers. Right. And actually, you're going to later answer why that is. So this is kind of cool. This is a slide of the esophagus sliced. So this is just one wall. You could see all the crazy layers that are in there under the microscope. I can't even reach it way up there. You could sort of tell, maybe not super easily, but those are a whole bunch of layers of narrow cells. When you actually look at it in the microscope, it'll be more zoomed in. You can probably see it a little better. But you could see that's not even most of it. Then you've got all the connective tissue, a little bit of muscle. There's the circular muscle, longitudinal muscle. And we don't actually have the serosa on there, it doesn't look like. Maybe it just fell off or something. Or they couldn't fit it in. So what would you say, what's most of it in terms of area? What kind of tissue? Yeah, it seems like the muscle layer is the biggest. Does that kind of make sense for the esophagus? Yeah, it takes quite a bit of force to, squeeze some chewed up food down there. So lots of muscle through there. All right, this is what the stomach actually looks like. This food comes down into there. I don't think most people realize it's that shape. I don't know, I think we have this image of just like a circle instead of this sort of kidney bean. Actually, it's, like a bean shape. So it comes down the esophagus. There's a sphincter that prevents the food from coming back up, which is good, because when your stomach acid and food go back through that sphincter, what do you get?
GERD.
What?
GERD.
What?
Gastroesophageal reflux.
Oh, yeah. What are you saying? Yeah, so If it's not too bad, maybe you just call it indigestion. If it's bad, then yeah, it'd be the acid reflux.
So when somebody does the surgery to shrink their stomach, where do they tie it off? On that bottom loop portion? You know, to shrink their stomach?
Yeah, no, I know the gastric bypass.
There we go, yeah.
I don't actually know how that works. I mean, I know you make it smaller, but I don't know exactly how. I have to look it up.
Take that bottom portion, so.
I don't see. Might know anything about it.
No, I think they put a band actually.
Like just squeeze it.
Yeah.
It's like right through the
Yeah, they put a band around the top.
Okay,
so
there you
you
go.
don't eat as much.
So like,
People still keep eating and it actually.
Yeah, well, some, like, there's two different things.
uh-huh.
One, cut it right off, one
Okay, so you could. There's one where you just actually like take out part of the stomach.
Well, because their stomachs are like big bariatric patients.
Yeah, you can. I mean, it could stretch and stretch.
80% of it is exactly what it is.
Oh, that's crazy.
I always watch 600-pound life, guys. I know about
So they take the bottom portion and they cut it off?
I don't know. I mean, you certainly wouldn't take out
No, that's
any of these areas. But I would guess they just, you said they take out 80% of it. So the stomach is basically the same kinds of cells throughout. So you could just chop it here, chop it there, and sew it all back together.
Then there's one that's like an RNY, which hook your large intestine to the duodenum. So it doesn't go through small intestine.
Oh, wow. To prevent you from absorbing like calories and stuff.
What is that?
It's like an RNY or something like that. They call it triduodenal switch.
Maybe that's why the bitch is
That seems pretty extreme. I mean, wouldn't that be dangerous to not have your small intestine hooked up?
They say a lot of people have like malabsorption issues and stuff.
Yeah, I would think so. That make you malnourished. I don't know.
They just cut, like, they just don't use that. They, like, bypass it through.
Oh, that's crazy. A row and Y.
That's, like, what I...
Oh, and so, but you
And then
still
this
get.
is when they do the band around it,
Oh, crazy.
as far as I...
Crazy. All right. Well, I feel like I'll have to look those up and put it in the PowerPoint for next time. All the different gastric bypassy surgeries. So that, did I see that right? So the RNY one, they skip the stomach even, right? So the RNY one, I think that picture from, it just goes, you hook up the esophagus to the large intestine.
Wow. That's gross.
And there's one that they just take the whole water proportion and, like, leave this from, like, you know? And they
Yeah.
take out, like, that.
The fundus.
Yeah, they just, like, cut across the body of it.
Oh man. Poor stomach. It's always getting stuff done to it. It's just trying to do its job. All right. So I would say that the connective layer in the GI tract, it's strong, but it's also very flexible. It's got lots of like elastin in it. So your stomach can stretch out a whole bunch. Your intestines can stretch as the food passes through and then collapse back to the normal size. Which is crazy, like when you look at, like an infant, like how their bellies can like increase in size by like 50% just from like not pooping for a couple days. So crazy. That's like whoop, whoop, whoop. It's really weird. Or even us. I mean, as adults, how big? I mean, just from like any sort of intestinal issues, like what, 30% bigger? Just from day to day? Just because of being full of stuff. So very stretchy. All right, so what does the stomach do? We're going to talk more about the stomach next time, about like how all the hormones work and everything. But it does obviously mix everything around. And it secretes gastric juice, which is full of strong acid. You know what the pH of your stomach acid is? Range. What? Other way, it is acidic. Do I? Way lower than that. So average, I mean, it changes when you're eating. So like between 2 and 3. Interesting fact, a python's pH is below 1 after they eat. So because they're able to like digest, like, you know, they just swallow like a whole thing. So they can digest bones and just from super low pH. The only thing they can't digest, you know what it is? It's hair.
That's how our snake, like, when he has excrement, it's all white with hair in it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. What kind of snake?
Python.
A python? Cool. We'll have to talk to you about the python research we did in our lab at CU.
Pretty neat.
Yeah.
Your basement shoes in.
They sleep with your kids, right? Yeah.
Right next to your bed.
All right. So I guess what's the point? Why do you have acid in the stomach? It helps to denature proteins. And the reason that's important is because proteins start as these like tight little balls of amino acids. And you can't very easily get enzymes in there to break them into pieces. So the first thing you do is denature them with acid, which means they like unfold. They don't actually like go into pieces, but they do kind of unfold in the stomach. Like a little flower shirt. So that's the first step of digestion. So kind of unfold those proteins, start to break things down. The what? We're going to talk about gastrin next time. So we're going to talk about 3 main hormones that regulate how all these systems work. Because obviously you want to make the right amount of HCl and squeeze the food the right amount and everything. But we're going to talk about that next time. All right, so if you zoom in to the wall of the stomach, obviously still the same layers, right? The serosa, the muscle layer, submucosa, where you've got a lot of blood vessels, and then the mucosa layer. And you'll see this a lot. So the stomach isn't actually just totally, the wall isn't completely flat. It's not just like a balloon. Instead, you've got these gastric pits, and this increases the surface area. So you've got, what shape are those cells, do you think? Yeah. So technically it's columnar, but it looks kind of cuboidal. And if you put cuboidal, I wouldn't mark it wrong or anything, because it's pretty close. But those kinds of cells are good at secreting large amounts of gastric juice and enzymes. And you've also got a bunch of mucus cells as well in the stomach. Can you think of why you need to secrete a bunch of mucus in the stomach? Do it? Yeah, so obviously she said protect it from the acid, so Michelle said. So these cells are kind of delicate. You can't expose them to pH 2 without them getting damaged. So it's lined with like a thin layer of mucus all around, which kind of protects them. So it's different from like the mucus you made in the saliva, which was for lubrication and to help you chew the food and everything. Right. And so one of the risk factors for getting ulcers, like a gastric ulcer, is if for some reason you're not making as much mucus or something has happened to some of those cells, and the acid comes into contact with the actual cells there, kills them, and then you get like exposed blood vessels, which will leak blood into the stomach, etc.
If you like,
Uh-huh.
it's really acidic,
Yeah.
can it eventually like damage your esophagus?
Yeah, so that's something with like anorexia as a problem. From all the acid. And also like acid reflux, if it's really bad, your esophagus can get really damaged. those squamous cells that are lining it can eventually get broken down and damaged.
Is that what polyps?
In the esophagus?
Yeah, it would be from the cells.
Not exactly sure what polyps in the esophagus are. I know like in the intestines, they're like excessive growth, right? Like polyps in the large intestine. But I don't know about polyps in the esophagus. I haven't looked those up. All right. Anyways. So let's look up a little bit of, let's see, 5.1 and 6.1. Peristalsis, an enterogastric reflex. Oops. Oops. Hold on.
Called mixing ways.
I'll start over.
Mix the food with secretions of the stomach. As food enters and distends the stomach, stretch receptors activate enteric or local reflexes that promote peristaltic movements. These movements.
All right, so let's take that first thing. So you have special neurons in the stomach wall that can tell when it's being stretched. And then they activate those muscles around the stomach. Because, hey, you've got food in here, we need to start churning it around. So that's the first part.
Mixing ways begin to mix the food with secretions of the stomach. The mixing waves force the digesting food, called chyme, toward and through the pyloric sphincter. Most of the food remains in the stomach, so it moves back and forth in a churning digestive motion. Digestive movements in the stomach are stimulated by the parasympathetic nervous system.
So do you see that retropulsion happening? Like it's just being pushed this way and then back up through the stomach. Right. So there's the esophageal sphincter, and then down here between the small intestine and the duodenum, or between the stomach and the duodenum is the pyloric sphincter. And you saw that just basically each time the stomach contracts, only a small amount of digested food goes into the small intestine, so that we can get it, the small intestine can get just, you know, small amounts at a time, so they can effectively deal with it and absorb everything. If this was just open, you just get acid pouring in there, and you might also get an ulcer down here, because ulcers in the small intestine are more common actually than stomach ulcers. Right. So about this
As more
one.
and more chyme leaves the stomach, distension of stretch receptors in the duodenum triggers the enterogastric reflex. The enterogastric reflex has many functions. It inhibits excessive amounts of chyme from entering the duodenum. It reduces intestinal cell erosion by limiting inflow of gastric acid, and it increases the duration of the digestion of chyme. This occurs in preparation for the movement of chyme into the small intestine. The motor impulses in the enterogastric reflex are sympathetic.
All right, did I have a question on this one? No, all right. What activates that reflex? Where's the receptor? The enterogastric reflex? Where's the receptor? You would think so, but not quite. The what?
Like when it dumps into its stomach.
Yeah, but where's the receptor, like in this picture? Yeah, so it is in the duodenum of the small intestine. So there's a receptor there. So when chyme comes in, it gets stretched, and it tells the sphincter to close. That's the reflex. I feel like they didn't actually say that up there anywhere. They gave you a bunch of reasons why you have it without telling you what it actually did. So as food goes into the duodenum, it tells the sphincter to close. So that's how you regulate the amount, or how fast the chyme, which is, that's just a word for digesting food, chyme. All right, so what's the main thing that keeps undigested food from moving into the small intestine? Oh, I've got, do you not have 4 at your table?
Thank you, Samantha.
I beat you to it.
She needs
Oh, sorry, Alex. All right, so I want you to chat with your group there, because we've got battle between 2 answers, basically. All right, final votes. All right, so the answer is actually E. So it's pyloric sphincter is obviously the thing that blocks it. But let's say you I don't know, you're being a bit of a glutton and you're just like swallowing big pieces of steak or something. Do you think they can fit through that sphincter when it's open? They can't. So anything kind of large gets stuck in the stomach to get churned around until it gets broken down all the way. Or at least broken down enough to go through there into the small intestine. Oh, and I guess I should mention the small intestine actually secretes bicarbonate, which is is that an acid or a base? It's a base. So as soon as that chyme comes in, it comes in like it gets mixed with sodium bicarbonate, and the pH goes back up to like 6 or 7, which is good because you wouldn't want, pH of 2 stuff going through your whole GI tract. Would really damage it. It needs to be back sort of neutral so you can start absorbing everything. And hopefully by then you've got everything sort of denatured and starting to break down. All right, so we've got 3 questions for you to work on by yourself first. This one. 1, 2, and 3. One, 2, and 3. the stomach. Yeah, those proteins like unfold. No, that was more like, I'm talking about more macro. Like if you swallowed a chunk of food or you didn't chew it enough.
The esophagus and stomach have different types of epithelial.
All right. So now you're going to close all your books and everything. Talk to your group mates and make sure for 2 and 3, a question like that, your answer should have the word because in there. It has the structure because for 2 and 3. So see if you can come up with something like that with your group. Okay, so are you looking up 3 right now?
Yeah, that it's the luminant in the stomach that creates the protect.
So what are columnar cells good at? May want to peek back at chapter 4. It'll tell you what columnar cells are good at, and then you can probably answer 3. All right, how y'all doing?
Hey,
Yeah.
because you said times. Because you said times. Is there more than one in each one?
No, I just meant like, stomach has 1, esophagus has 1.
Okay. I was thinking that, like, because there was a connective and the muscular and all of that.
Oh, those are outside of the epithelium.
Oh.
So for that question, we're just talking about the very
So
first
one.
layer. Yeah.
Okay. All
So
right.
why does the esophagus have stratified squamous? Would y'all write?
Because I put, because it collapses, right? Because it, like it goes back into the skull and it expands. That's not why?
No, that's the connective tissue does that part. Why do you have lots of layers of cells? That's the question.
To protect it
From what?
from the pH.
Mm,
And acids and form.
your esophagus doesn't have acid in it.
Oh, I don't know.
Keep thinking about it. You'll get it. It is protection from something, though. All right, shall I get number 2? Nice elephant. You should. That is hilarious. Yep, I got the Tuscaloosa wall. That'll be funny. So, why is the esophagus have stratified squamous? Oh, nothing to do with stretching, though. What? It does, but that's the connective tissue that does the stretching. So Ross said abuse. What kind of abuse are you talking about? Yeah, exactly. So as the food goes down, you could lose like 5 layers from the chip you just swallowed, and it doesn't hurt anything. If we just said, like, how does the structure of the esophagus support its function or something, then you could talk about the stretching. But since it's just talking about the epithelium, that's only that first layer.
Okay. So, like, it takes a lot of abuse for bringing a lot of food to, and, like, what that means, like, scratching at it.
Exactly.
And messing with it.
Yeah,
Irritating it, I guess.
yeah, so you can lose, you could scratch away cells and it doesn't hurt it.
What about, like, coughing? Does that, like, take out these cells?
Well, if you're just coughing, that's just air coming up the trachea through.
See, I get so confused with, like, breathing and it's the same. It's not, I know that, but.
Well, I mean, it's funny because, they do have like that common pathway for quite a while back there. But certainly if you're like vomiting a bunch, that would obviously damage those cells because they're not designed to withstand acid. Who does?
My cousin did.
From what?
Well, he has von Hippel-Lindau.
What's that?
It's like a really rare disease. Like, he grows tumors all over his body.
Oh, God.
Malignant and benign.
Uh-huh.
And he had like 19 brain lesions or something, like on his spinal cord and stuff. And so he had to get those like removed, but they tried radiation on him.
Uh-huh.
And then it made him really sick. So he threw up for months.
And it caused
It,
a
like,
hole in
burned
there.
a hole, and so it was like bleeding and running.
Oh my
And then
God.
like the puke wasn't going up anymore.
It was just
going
coming
into,
out
like,
the cavity.
nowhere else it was going. It was really bad.
Sounds terrible. Crazy. Oh, so what'd you get for 3 then?
Stomach secrete gastric juice, so if it's only one layer, like it can secrete in and out. You think?
Yeah, and columnar cells have a large surface area, which makes them good at secretion. Stop listing. So did you come up with 2 yet?
You said secretion.
That's not for 2 though.
For 3.
That's for 3.
So 3, I put secrete, absorb, protect, and release. Is that right?
Well, what does the stomach do? Which of those things?
Secrete and
So the main thing it does is secrete things. And column cells they're like wide, so they have a lot of surface area, so you can secrete lots of stuff. And if you're secreting, you only need 1 layer, so that's why it's simple.
so just secrete.
abrasion? That's not what you put down.
Uh-huh.
Is it right?
Yeah, what does that mean? That is right. What did you mean from that? For that? Uh-huh. Okay, well, it does scratch the surface.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But why does that not hurt the esophagus?
Because it has a lot of layers.
Because it has all layers. Exactly. So there you're getting. So that's how the structure supports the function. It's just what Chris and Edith just said. All right, did you all get it? So what'd you say for 2 then?
We put because the function, it allows to help with protection and water loss. And it's the first line of defense. And then the muscularis tissue, I feel like I said that wrong, helps move the food down and form the esophagus.
So that last part is true, but that's not really part of the epithelium. So the epithelium is only the first layer.
We also say that it has, it's stratified so that it's protecting with the many layers so that nothing goes through.
Right, so that's the key thing I think that you need there.
I was just thinking that when we were reading, stratified.
Yeah, so that's saying like it has stratified squamous because it's got all that sharp food stuff that's scraping away at it, right? All right, what'd y'all get?
I said supports the structure because it allows absorption and secretion through gastric juice.
Okay, so what kind of epithelium does it have?
The satisfied squamous epithelium.
Wait, are you talking about 2 or 3?
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry. It's the simple columnar
Uh-huh.
epithelium.
So
Got mixed up.
why does the columnar help with that?
To prevent the underlining tissue from being damaged by all the food particles being scraped.
Well, that's talking about the esophagus then. So let's start with the esophagus, because that one's probably easier.
Protection from abrasion, wear and tear from food particles that are being chewed, mixed up.
Okay. So how does it protect it? If it's stratified.
Layers.
Uh-huh. So what do you mean? It's got layers, so
Yeah, so it's able to get abrasions without hitting the underlying tissue.
there you go. Exactly. Right? So you could lose like 5 layers of that and nothing bad happens. That's why it's stratified. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and simple columnar is to protect from, it's just protection from chemicals, or from the acid, pretty much, right?
Well, it's not so much the cells that protect it. What did you tell me protected the mucus? So it's secreting mucus
Okay,
and secreting acid, right?
yeah,
And column cells are really good at secretion.
okay.
All right. So you got it. Got them. All right. So y'all are getting better at these. We're going to keep asking you questions like this. Because that's one of those questions you won't really find answers in the book or anything. It's like you kind of have to put 2 and 2 together to explain it. It's kind of interesting. So make sure you're being as specific as you can. So what I see a lot on exams is they'll say, well, the type of epithelium supports its function. And I'm like, well, yeah, but how? I know that. I want to know like how it does that or why. All right. What in the world? All right, so let's talk a little bit about the small intestine, especially the duodenum and the jejunum. You may think of the small intestine as just a hollow tube, but as you see when we do our dissections, are we going to dissect next week we get to, or no, 2 weeks, we'll look at the cat intestine and see what they look like. If you slice it open, it looks more like that, which is good because what does the small intestine do mostly? It absorbs most, like 90% of the nutrients from your food. So in order to absorb, you need lots of surface area. And so to do that, you've got a lot of invaginations of all these folds. So instead of the food like shooting through this hose, it's got to work its way like through all these little folds. So pretty cool. And then if you even zoomed in on one of those folds, even those folds aren't flat. So if you look under the microscope, you'd see what's called these villi sticking up all over the place, which that also increases the surface area. Because now instead of this flat surface, you've got all these pieces sticking out. What kind of epithelium do you see there? It's columnar again. Simple or stratified? Simple again. And you may have looked up what else is columnar epithelium good at. So you told me in the stomach it's good at secretion. It's good at absorption too. Is there a picture on here? And you can't quite see it on here. Wish it did, but those columnar cells, they actually have microscopic tiny hairs called microvilli sticking out of them to increase the surface area even more for absorption. So we've got like 3 extra surface area improvements as you go farther in. And we'll talk about a few different cells. So you've got the absorptive cells in pink, the Paneth cells in blue there, and which other ones? You've also got the goblet cells, which for some reason I don't see. Oh, there it is. There's a goblet cell right there. So I'm going to talk about those. And kind of makes sense. These villi, why do you think they've got capillaries running up them?
They can take those absorbed nutrients.
Yeah. So it wouldn't do you any good just to absorb nutrients into nothing. You would absorb them into the blood. So highly vascularized, lots of blood vessels. So the nutrients can go straight through that one layer of cells into the blood. And then, of course, there's muscle there, too. Because that food, without a muscle layer, it wouldn't get pushed through the small intestine. It would just kind of sit there. So there's constant rhythmic contractions from one end to the other. Push things through slowly. All right, so 3 main cell types we'll worry about. Most of them are absorptive cells that have the microvilli on them to just absorb all the nutrients, like amino acids or carbohydrates, things like that. Goblet cells that make the mucus, so you can keep things smoothly moving along. And then the Paneth cells, those are an immune cell that eat bacteria that happen to get through the stomach, or any viruses or anything. So you can imagine, do you think your food's full of microbes? It definitely is. So you've got the pH of the stomach to get rid of them. You've got that lysozyme in your saliva to help get rid of some bacteria. And then anything that gets through, you've even got microbes down at antimicrobial white blood cells to eat them. All right, so main functions, mixing. What does digestion exactly mean when we say that in this case? Yeah, so breaking down food could be a little more specific, breaking down what in food? So breaking down like the macromolecules into smaller pieces. So if you've got like starch, which is like hundreds of glucoses attached together, digestion is like chopping them with enzymes into pieces. So like chopping off individual glucose molecules, or taking a protein and breaking it into 50 pieces. That's digestion. And then absorption, I think you know what that is. All right, here's some more small intestine at home review for you. Click on that one. All right, and then we got our large intestine, which I meant to actually click on this one. And actually, we could do small intestine first. So the small intestine's got 3 different regions based on the location, like how close it is to the stomach or the large intestine. So there's your stomach, and it puts the chyme into the duodenum, so small intestine, which you notice is a pretty short area, right, compared to the total. And then you've got 2 longer areas, so the jejunum and the ileum. Going through there. So as you go through there, what do you think is changing in terms of what's happening in those areas? which area does most of the digestion, if you had to guess? So probably these first two. And then as you get farther along, what does the ileum do more of? The absorption. Obviously, it's a continuum, like the duodenum does absorb some. But as you move through, you go from less and less digestion to more and more absorption. All right, so let's take a look at the large intestine. So here's the end of the ileum of the small intestine, and it drops right here into the ascending colon, which means it goes up. So this large intestine goes up first, and then the transverse colon, which goes across and down into the descending colon, to the sigmoid colon, to the rectum, and to the anus here. And here's your appendix, by the way. It's attached to the bottom of the large intestine. What's the appendix full of? Anybody know? It's full of bacteria, hopefully helpful ones. And so it's thought that its main function it evolved to have is provide like a reservoir for if you have like really bad diarrhea or anything, which you could imagine before modern medicine and stuff, when you had all these transmissible diseases, that was a lot more common. So it could store like your good, help your digestion bacteria. So if all this gets flushed out, well, it can just recolonize it with your healthy, normal bacteria.
So then if you don't have your appendix, then where does that bacteria stay?
So if you don't have your appendix, then at least in theory, maybe you'd have trouble repopulating the large intestine if you had bad diarrhea. But there hasn't been any studies that have like shown any increased risk of anything for not having your appendix. Probably because we don't all get cholera all the time. Thank goodness. So kind of interesting. The large intestine does look more like a hollow tube because there's lots of, the main digestion that's happening is bacteria or other microbes breaking down what the small intestine couldn't digest. So we have a nice symbiotic relationship because we don't have all the enzymes we need to break down everything in food, but bacteria do. So anything that's not broken down, bacteria can break it down, they get energy from it, and then we get some of the byproducts, like smaller molecules that we can absorb. Yes, exactly. So one of the interesting, or not interesting, but disgusting parts is depending on what kind of bacteria are living there and what they get exposed to, some of their byproducts are carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide gas. So it's very nice. And if you're lactose intolerant, what does that mean? Yeah, so your small intestine doesn't make lactase anymore, or not very much. So the lactose and dairy products go straight to the small intestine, and it gets to these voracious bacteria in the large intestine, which break it down into huge amounts of CO2 and sulfuric or hydrogen sulfide gas. So that's where all that bloating and nastiness comes from. Yes. So what do people take if they eat ice cream and they've got lactose intolerance? What do you think that is?
Enzyme that breaks down lactose.
Right. So lactate is lactase. It's the enzyme that breaks down lactose. So you just take a pill, and that goes down to the small intestine with the dairy and should break down the lactose for you before it gets to the large intestine, hopefully. So yeah. Glad we could incorporate a fart discussion into today. Thanks, Ross. So what's the function? More mixing, because we've still got to mix all that stuff up with the bacteria. And one of the things the bacteria do is break down proteins to amino acids. And they also make some vitamins that we absorb, which is very helpful. So water, ions, vitamins, and we can talk about defecation next. All right, I would tell you the study of which bacteria live in your large intestine is just now getting started. So there's people that think which bacteria you have in there determine your risk of cancer, of heart disease, even mood. So they've correlated like depression with which bacteria live down there. So it may play a huge role in a lot of processes that we're just now kind of understanding. And if they've looked, I think it's like tens of thousands of different species of bacteria and different microbes live in your large intestine. And it's totally different between different people. So, all right. If you want some extra review of the histology, like what kind of epithelium, it's all through there. All right, let's look real quick at this one. All right, so here's our defecation reflex.
Stimulated by the filling of the rectum, activate the defecation reflex. Defecation is an autonomic nervous system reflex in which sensory impulses are sent to the control center in the spinal cord. As parasympathetic impulses travel down the spinal sacral nerves, they stimulate longitudinal contractions of the rectum, forcing feces into the anal canal. They also relax the internal anal sphincter, allowing the feces to move toward the external anal sphincter. The voluntary relaxation of the external anal sphincter allows defecation to be completed.
There you go. So kind of interesting, you do have two sphincters, which are just things that close, right? One's involuntary. So once something's coming down here, there's a receptor that senses it, and it'll open that internal one. And we don't have control over that. But then this external one is the one that you're consciously controlling. So that's the one my daughter doesn't understand yet. We're working on it. All right, so what about question 4? See if you can get that one with your groups. You got 2 minutes. You may have done 4 already, I don't know. Y'all already did that one, didn't you? Cool. So, yeah, so you might want to mention a few specific things for how the surface area is increased, how we talked about.
Microvilli.
And the folds. Did you already do 4? Folds.
I talked about the folds and the blood vessels and the muscles.
Okay. What is it about the folds that help? Like, why are they?
There's lots of surface area inside the
There you go.
layers, so that the passing through can get blood.
Yeah. So you might want to just add that word surface area or something in there.
You
Okay, but how? Right? So another one of those how questions.
How do the what? How does the grade?
So describe the ways that the structure supports its function.
Well, it's because secretion is more of a digestion.
Well, what about the structure though? What is something in a structure that helps with those things?
Like for the absorption be through the microvilli.
Okay, so it has microvilli, which increases surface area. Is there anything else that increases surface area that we talked about?
The folds.
What?
The folds.
Yeah, so circular folds. And then the villus too, right?
And the what? Circular. What did you say? Fold? What?
Yeah. Remember how it's all folded up in there?